The views expressed on this broadcast of the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or its affiliates. KHLT and Take12Radio.com are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Remember me, I'm the one down on the floor, telling you people that I ain't there anymore. Calling in the street, just about to lose my mind.
Welcome to Walking Through the Big Book with Chris Schroeder and Monty Meyer. And now, here's those two guys who investigate prior to contempt, Chris and the Monty'man.
Welcome. Gather around the hutch, the fireplace, or whatever it is you do when you tune into this show. Welcome to Walking Through the Big Book with Chris Schroeder and myself, the Monty'man, or Monty Manic, whatever you want to call me these days. Today I'm feeling pretty doggone manic because I had my first cup of coffee that I've had in about 5 days. So maybe that has something to do with it. Chris, how the heck are you, bud?
I'm doing great, Monty. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous, and I hope it's just not the caffeine talking. At least it's not the booze talking, huh?
That is one good thing we can be very grateful for, Monty.
Yes, amen to that. Amen to that. And I do want to mention to the listeners, before we get into the show, I just want to give a plug to the 12-Step Music Fest. We will be there with bells on at the 12-Step Music Fest, and that is November. That's just coming up in a couple weeks. November 5th through the 8th. Take 12 Radio will be there. We'll be there with our booth, along with our brand new member of the Take 12 family, Leon Lilly, recovery comedian, and he will be doing, we're actually going to be airing a show with Leon once a week, all surrounded around recovery and comedy. And so I just want to let you guys know that if you're going to the 12-Step Music Fest, it is at Sugarloaf Key, mile marker 20, and it's just going to be a blast. The whole campground is closed off to the general public. It's just for those of us in recovery and our guests, and it's just going to be a heck of a thing. Over 25 different recording artists that are in recovery or are specifically recovery recording artists will be there. This is our second year. Last year, Dale went in my place because I was so sick this year. I'm going to be there again with Leon, and I just encourage you all to come to the booth, talk to us. We're going to be doing some interviews right there at the booth. So that is there. That's the plug for the 12-Step Music Fest. You can go to 12stepmusicfest.com. And you can get your tickets there and get all sorts of information. And we're going to be having 12-step meetings out on the water. And I don't mean on a boat on the water. I mean in the water. So that's going to be a kick. Hey, you got to try something new every once in a while. So there's that there. Yeah. The other thing that we've been doing, and we just started actually last show, is we're having a book of the week, a recovery book, a recovery-oriented book, or information on your mainstream 12-step fellowships, and different things like that. And we've got a book of the week thing, and we post it right there on the site, right where you're listening to this interview right now, unless you're on a portable device. And it has a link to Amazon where you can pick up that book. And when you do that, a portion of the proceeds from that book come to Take 12 Radio to keep this show on the air, if you actually purchase the book. And here's the key, folks. If you go to that link, you will see how many new books are available and how many used books are available of those books. The used books are new. So that's one of the best kept secrets in the world. So, if you think one price is too much, go to the used book thing. It's just that some of them are not in their cellophane packages, and that's really the only difference. So, with that in mind, Chris, what is the book for this week?
What I'd like to recommend this week, Monty, is a book called The Road to Fellowship. It's a book that was written by Richard DeBeal, and it's basically about the role of the Emmanuel movement and the Jacoby Club in the development of Alcoholics Anonymous. The Emmanuel movement and the Jacoby Club were both founded in Boston at the at the start of the 1900s, and they were enormously popular. And they had about 30 years of impressive success in treating alcoholics because of the influence of the Boston AA and a man named Richmond Walker. A lot of the Emmanuel Movement and Jacoby Club stuff kind of became part of the Alcoholics Anonymous philosophy. Monty, you know the 24 Hours a Day book, right? That's been around in the rooms for a long, long time. It's the small little black meditation book. That was written by Richmond Walker, who was a very, very early AA. Around back in the 40s, and he was heavily influenced by the Jacoby Club and Roland Hazard and Richard Peabody and a lot of other people. So anyway, go to the link on the website and check this out. If you're at all interested in the historical roots of Alcoholics Anonymous and how the spiritual recovery processes, where they came from, this is an interesting book.
Good going. And this is The Road to Fellowship, the role of the Emmanuel Movement and the Jacoby Club in the development of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the author is Richard, and I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. How do you pronounce his name?
I think it's Dubiel.
Richard Dubiel. Okay, great. It's paperback, and enjoy, friends. All right, we finished up the last time with We Agnostics, and we have been getting quite a few emails in, just people, Chris, that are just really enjoying this show. And I've even heard statements like, I've never looked at it this way before. This is the first time I've been able to actually sit down and actually enjoy a book study. One lady emailed and said, I'm so glad to be able to tune in, listen to this, and not listen to people argue.
Yeah.
So we are now moving into Chapter 5, The Beloved, How It Works.
Absolutely. Let me start by prefacing all this with Bill wrote in some of his writings about how this chapter started. He had gathered a bunch of stories. He had written four chapters of the book prior to this, assembled it all, passed it back and forth to the different groups in Akron and New York, gotten a lot of input on it, but it was time. He recognized it was time. He had said, we're going to show precisely how we have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, and he knew it was about time that he needed to start listing out precisely how we have recovered. And he had a little bit of trepidation about this. He knew how important it was going to be that he get this right. He needed to basically combine the experience of the first 100 into a process or a program that people could follow in book form. Now, up to him starting Chapter 5, the steps per se did not exist. They existed as tenets or precepts of the Oxford Group. They existed in spiritual exercises that many, if not all, of the early AAs had performed and practiced in their lives, but it hadn't been put down on paper. Now, he tells the story about he was in bed. He was suffering from one of his many bouts of depression, and a lot of times he just wouldn't get out of bed all day long. Back in those days, there was a lot of pressure on him. I do think he probably was a clinical sufferer of depression, and he put a pad and a pencil on his lap while he was laying in bed, and he kind of asked for a little bit of inspiration. Probably something like, God, please help me get this right. I need to lay out the path toward you for these alcoholics to follow, and give me some inspiration. Yeah. And the story he tells is the pen just started moving across the paper, and he kind of came out of this very, very deep process where he wasn't really conscious of much. And he realized that it had only been, 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. And he looked down on the page and he saw how it works. He saw what gets read in a lot of the fellowship meetings. And
Wow.
what I would like to do is I would like to read it as it was written, not as it was edited and put into the first edition of the Big Book, but I'd like to read it to you in manuscript form. And the reason for that is that there's some differences in everyone that's ever been to the support groups that use the book Alcoholics Anonymous are familiar with how it works. It gets read at a lot of meetings, but not many people have heard it in manuscript form. So I'm going to read this as it was written in 1938 by Bill Wilson as he was putting the book Alcoholics Anonymous together. And what I'll do is when there's changes or when there's differences between what the first edition actually published this as and the original manuscript, I'll try to change my voice a little bit, but most people will pick up on it.
Okay.
Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery. 1. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we understood him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly, on our knees, asked him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. You may exclaim, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. C, that God can and will. If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. If you are convinced, you are now at step 3, which is that you may make a decision to turn your will and your life over to God as you understand Him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Monty, isn't that an interesting? Aren't changes in that interesting?
Extremely interesting. Can you say what C was again in the ABCs? That God what?
That God can and will.
Can and will. It doesn't even have if he were sought in there.
Right, right.
But that he can and he will. That, and then the rest of it. Yeah, what amazing stuff. I'm trying to write quickly, so when we go off the air, I'm going to have you email me that because.
Sure.
I was aware of some of those, but not that much. Wow.
You know, it's very, very interesting to study the original manuscript. You can get the original manuscript from Anonymous Press. There's a number of places that you can track it down at. I've got a copy of Clarence Snyder's an actual photocopy of Clarence Snyder. He was the man who started the third AA group in Cleveland, Ohio. I have a copy of his. But it's available. You can find these. And why I like to look at the original manuscript is the original manuscript was what the Alcoholics put together. Bill Wilson and the Alcoholics put together. The manuscript was then passed around to the different, different friends in religion, psychiatry, and medicine, and some editorial people. And what came back was a lot of suggestions to the manuscript. And one of them was, Bill, you got to stop saying you. Why don't you say this is what we did instead of this is what you have to do?
Uh-huh.
Now, why I like being kind of directed a little bit more than told what someone else did is it hits you a little bit harder. You know, I think that the alcoholic experience is closer to the original manuscript than it is the book Alcoholics Anonymous, because a lot of the suggestions to make editorial changes were put into practice, and that reflected the first edition of the book reflected those changes. So if you really want to dig into the big book, put a big book on the left-hand side of your desk, an original manuscript on the right, and just check out the changes because they're incredibly interesting. There's whole paragraphs that are missing from the big book that were in the original manuscript.
Right. And I find it interesting because out of one corner of our mouth we say, we need to be hard on ourselves and, shut up and sit down and listen and we get kind of harsh sometimes. And the other side of our mouth, we're saying, well, we don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to make it to where people will leave, And
Let's make it so soft and touchy-feely that no one will feel uncomfortable and they'll all die.
Yeah.
If they're alcoholics.
Exactly.
That's a good thing.
And you know what's so funny, Chris, is that we start out being all cuddly and everything else, but usually if we're sponsoring somebody, we usually end up at some point saying, "Look it, you either got to do this or you don't." I mean, we end up at some point in our relationship with our sponsor, your sponsors, getting a little firm, don't we?
This is my belief on proper etiquette. In a support group, it's basically you don't want to shame anybody.
That's right.
You don't want to demean anybody. Some of the confrontational techniques of yore really have been shown to not work. Like shut up and sit down, stupid. Take the cotton out of your ears and shove it in your mouth. Maybe there's a time and a place for that, but I've got to tell you personally, I was so demoralized and so shamed, and my esteem was so shot because of alcoholism. I didn't need somebody else doing that.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that we shield people from the truth.
Right.
We just have to treat them in a compassionate, respectful way while we're sharing the truth to them.
There you go.
And listen, you're going to probably die if you don't turn your will and your life over to the care of God. You can't manage your life. You need to fire your manager. You need to learn how to deal with life under new management, management through a higher power. And if you don't do that, you're probably going to die. I mean, if we're afraid to say that to people, it would basically be like, telling somebody who's come into the emergency room at the hospital, well, if you feel like going into the operating room later, we'll go ahead and we'll take that bullet out of your abdomen, but we want to make sure that you feel comfortable with everything first. No, just put them on a gurney and get them in the operating room. You don't have to be disrespectful or shaming to do that. But I personally, I don't want to be guilty of not telling somebody the truth. Would you rather step on somebody's feelings or step on their grave? Is really the question. And if you hold back some of the hard truths of the 12-step recovery program, you can be, they can like you more, but they're going to end up being dead. So there's a balance. There's a balance that has to be met, I think, with the attitudes that go on in support groups.
There's a man I respect very highly, Dr. James Dobson, who says, when you're disciplining your children, you don't need to scream at them. All you need to do is tell them what the consequences are if they do this. You don't have to scream it, and then you just follow through. And so I don't think we need to scream and yell at each other. All we have to do is say, hey, look, A plus B equals C. Then are we going to do the math or are we not? And there you go. And I get it. I get it loud and clear. When my sponsor says, hey, Mont, remember when you told me I had permission to call you on your stuff? Yes. Well, you might want to rethink what you're about to do. See, I can handle that, and he's right in my face with it at the same time.
One of my mentors early on was very, very easy on me. He knew I had very, very sensitive alcoholic feelings, and he didn't want to be shaming in any way, but he knew he had to get across some hard truths to me. And he did that with as much compassion as possible. But sometimes when I was just really dense and really just not getting it, he would come at me in a little bit stronger way.
Uh-huh.
But it ended up that individual was probably the perfect person for me in year one.
You bet.
Now I'm gonna go back through this. There's so much depth and weight to this message of how it works. I'm back in the 4th edition now. But I'm going to go through this again and just add some commentary to some of it. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Now, that's an important statement. Rarely have we seen a person who has thoroughly followed our path. The people that did the things that they talk about in this book were still sober at that point in time. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. It's a simple program. There are people who cannot or will not. I like how he says that. He doesn't. It's a non-judgmental way of looking at it.
Right.
The people who don't make it, who are exposed to this, that don't make it, either cannot or will not give themselves to this simple program. What's scary today is there's a lot of 12-step fellowships where no one is really offered the simple program. It's not explained to them.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically being led to believe that it's a meeting dependent sobriety that they're being led into. Like how if you keep going to a whole lot of meetings all the time, you're going to be okay. That's not what they did back in the old days.
No.
What they did was they offered you the simple program, and either you could not or would not work that program.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the people who would usually fail. The ones that are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And I've thought a lot about that. What type of honesty? Is he talking about cash register honesty? I think he's talking about looking at step one. I mean, have you really been honest with yourself about step one? Are you powerless over alcohol? Do you get the mental obsession? Do you get the physical craving when you drink? Have you looked at and is there a serious buy-in on your part as far as the unmanageability in your life? If you're constitutionally capable of being honest with step one, there's really nowhere else to go except this simple program, because nothing else you've ever tried has worked, obviously, or you wouldn't be at this point.
Right.
So there are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to be born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. Then he talks about people with grave emotional and mental disorders. And, today you see a huge amount of what's known as co-occurring disorders in alcoholism recovery or drug addiction recovery. It's become incredibly easy for people who are on their way down the scale to get in front of professionals who can either accurately or inaccurately diagnose them for mental disorders. There's every year that goes by, there's a higher percentage of people in the support groups that are on psychiatric medications. And basically what it says in here is many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest, and I see that. I see anybody who's willing to be honest enough about step one and persevering and painstaking enough to move from step 2 to step 12 recover, almost irregardless of other conditions in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. He's talking about the stories in the back of the book. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. Willing to go to any length. A lot of times what you'll hear is, "Kid, are you willing to go to any lengths?" And that question is being asked before what any lengths looks like is being offered to the individual. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And there's been a lot of abuses about this. I just heard yesterday about this person who was working with somebody and made him do something incredibly humiliating. If you want to work with me, you're going to do this, and it was. I'm not even going to share it. It was incredibly humiliating. Mm-hmm. And the person did it, and when they got up, the person said, "Well, now I know you're really willing to go to any lengths."
Brother.
Those type of abuses are not really helpful. The confrontational type of tactics are not really the greatest way to go. If you're willing to go to any length, you got to understand in the chapter, working with others, the first thing you're supposed to do is leave this book with your prospect. Have them read this book. So when you ask somebody what lengths, are they willing to go to any lengths, they know what any lengths looks like. It looks like the instructions in this book. Are you willing to do those things? If you're willing to do those things, then you are ready to take certain steps. And some of these we booked. I know I had a hard time with 5, and I had a hard time with 9, and it was like it was a process for me to get ready. And one of the amazing things that I've found is each step gives you the power to take the next one. I do a lot of talking in treatment centers and places like that, Monty. And when you're talking about step 9, everybody's got this look on their face. Excuse me, they've got this look on their face like, I could never do that. That's out of the question.
Yeah.
And what I try to explain to them is of course you don't think you can do this step right now. You don't have the power to do this step right now. You get the power from steps 1 through 8. So, don't write this step off yet just because you don't have the power currently to do it. You need to do this one step at a time. A lot of us think that we can find an easier, softer way. I'll tell you what, most people that come into 12-step support groups today don't do a full buy-in. Don't work the steps. Don't become of service in that group. And they're really looking for an easier, softer way. They're at best, they're looking for a meeting-dependent type of sobriety, at worst, they think that this is just not for me. I'm not really into this. This group is, crazy. Everybody's, talking about their problems, and I can't see how this could help me. And they're gonna go back out, and they're gonna go continue to look for ways to, ways to get their life put back in order that don't have anything to do with the meeting rooms. And a lot of times that's the fault of the fellowship. There are some really, really bad fellowship meetings out there, Monty. I mean, every once in a while you hear, never been to a bad meeting. Well, I got to tell you, I have.
I have too.
And,
yeah.
And there's some meetings that it's like a bad Bob Newhart show. Where everybody goes around the room and talks about their problems and their dysfunction and updates everybody, about the issue du jour. And you gotta consider the newcomer. If a newcomer comes in there and thinks, well, how is talking with other people about very personal problems in my life going to help me? The newcomer's right. It's really not. There's a deeper methodology to 12-step recovery than just sitting around and talking about your problems. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Fearless, trust in God that you can get through this process. Thorough, that little voice in your head that's going to tell you you don't need to do this. Don't listen to that little voice. You need to be fearless and thorough.
Yeah.
Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go. Absolutely. Somebody pointed this out to me the other day. He said, Chris, it tells you to let go of your old ideas. It doesn't tell you to let go of your bad old ideas. It tells you to let go of your old ideas. That means all of them. So even if you think you have a good idea, you may not be right. So you need to let go of how you think everything runs to be open to a new experience and to some new direction.
And isn't that because when we come in, we are so befogged and so forth that we may have some really good ideas and we may be right about many of them, but the way it was explained to me was, all right, you need to, my sponsor says, put them in this imaginary box, give them to me, and the ones you were right with, well, you're right, you'll be right with, but you don't want to go into this thing thinking that you're right about all this stuff because you just don't know. You're too messed up right now. And I mean that's kind of how it was explained to me, because I fought against that, because there was stuff, Chris. It was like there were certain things I know I'm right about. Now some of those things, you bet I was. Some of them I wasn't.
And how are you really going to know which one those are? The best possible atmosphere to be in for learning is to be open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think what it's doing is it's pointing us to please be open-minded about even things that you disagree about. Just be open-minded enough to consider them.
Yep.
Because if your mind or your way or your personal philosophy or your life management skills were going to get you out of trouble, they would have done so by now.
Yeah.
So we need to be open to some new direction. It says, remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful, and it certainly is. Without help, it is too much for us, but there is one who has all power, that one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Remember, these are not suggestions. These 12 steps are a suggested program of recovery.
Right.
If you don't want to do these steps, what are you doing in a 12-step fellowship? This is the program of recovery for the 12-step fellowship. Why are you here if you don't want to go through all 12 steps? It doesn't make any sense at all. I think I said the other week it'd be like joining Oprah's book club and refusing to read any of the books but wanting to discuss them.
Yeah.
Would that make any sense?
To some people, I guess it does. I could never figure that one out.
If you don't like this suggested program of recovery, you should probably go somewhere else and not take up a seat in a 12-step fellowship, because you're just going to be you're just going to be part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Right.
And people die. People die who don't get exposed to a solution. It's life and death. One, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. There was tons of material in the chapters up to this point that gave you the information you need to find your own truth about this. Two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. There was a lot in, we spent 3 weeks, Monty, going through We Agnostics, and I think we dug pretty deep into that. And we talked about the restoration of sanity. We talked about putting life under new management. We talked about the healing power of God.
Mm-hmm.
3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This is the step that's coming up. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible. I like that. Wherever, not whenever possible, wherever possible. Except you always hear whenever. It says wherever, and there's a big difference. Yeah. Wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. I'm just going to hang with step 12 here for a minute,
all right,
Monty. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. So what is the message that you're supposed to carry? You're supposed to carry the message of the spiritual awakening as the result of the 12 steps.
There you go.
That's the message. That's a message of depth and weight. There's a lot of messages that are going on all over support groups.
Yeah.
Keep coming back. I mean, you could go on and on and on with these messages, and it's not that they're necessarily bad in and of themselves, but the good can sometimes be the enemy of the best. And if you want to really know what the treatment for alcoholism is, or I would even say drug addiction or any addictive illness, what the treatment is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps is what the treatment is.
Yeah, that's good.
We tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many have explained what in order. I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. You always need to be willing to grow along spiritual lines. That, I have found, is essential for this process. You need to be on the spiritual path. If you place yourself in God's hands and you get on the spiritual path, you're going to be okay. There are going to be times when you're in the barrel. There are going to be times when you're really going through some stuff. You're going to be in pain, but you're going to be fine if you stay in God's hands and stay on the spiritual path and don't give up. You talk to any spiritual master, any of the Buddhists, the Christian mystics, the Sufi masters, you talk to any of them, and they talk about a period called the dark night of the soul, or the cloud of unknowing. And these are periods on the spiritual journey where things become very difficult, and you start to have a lot of self-doubt.
Uh-huh.
You start to think that maybe this isn't working. Maybe this is the wrong way for me. I should be better than I am right now. These are just signposts on the spiritual path, and they're basically telling you you're heading in the right direction. You just need to keep going.
Let me ask you a question here, and I hear this so much. I see if you do too. I hear the phrase progress, not perfection. That's what I hear people say. What I seldom hear them say is what it says, that we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And I think they're two different things, don't you?
Yes, there's people misquote all the time, and there probably would be no problems in the 12-step fellowships if you had informed group members with experience with recovery. If that's all that were in the rooms, the recovery rates would shoot back up to 70, 90%. But that's not what you have. You have a lot of people who've gone to a million meetings and listened to a lot of wisdom teachings and throw out trite little sayings every 5 minutes that have little or no direct relationship to a recovery program. But when it says spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, spiritual progress is all you're going to ever get. You're never going to get spiritual perfection. If you know anything about the spiritual life, perfection is really not something that you're ever going to want to claim. If you claim that, then you've lost your humility. And if there's no humility, there's really no spiritual progress, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. The description of the alcoholic, you can find that in More About Alcoholism, and there is a solution. The chapter to the agnostic is We Agnostics. Our personal adventures before and after are the stories at the back of the book. If you read those things, they're going to make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if you were sought. These are the ABCs. And if you take these ABCs at all literally, at all seriously, they really point in the correct direction for the spiritual life. You cannot manage your own life on your own willpower without trying to integrate your actions into what you think God would have you do or be. You're going to be managing your life on a selfish basis. If you do that, it's selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of the alcoholic's problem. Mm-hmm. It's the root of all spiritual illness. It's the root of your alcoholic illness. So if you could have done a better job on your own, you probably would have by now. So you need to consider switching managers. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Let's talk about human powers for a minute, Monty. What are some human powers that cannot relieve you of your alcoholism?
My sponsor, the meeting.
Right?
The meeting of a collective amount of people, because whether it's 1 or 25, it's the same thing.
Your psychiatrist.
Your pastor, your rabbi.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Your fortune teller.
Your fortune teller, yeah.
None of these people have enough power available to offer you for you to be relieved of your alcoholism. That power needs to manifest and needs to become manifest in you. And it's a power that most people, certainly all of the early AAs, it's a power that they described as the power of God, the power of God's healing. Now, we talked a little bit about the atheists. We talked a little bit about the people who have a hard time believing in an interventionary deity of one form or another. This manifestation of God is the absolute and ultimate recovery from an addictive illness. The spiritual malady, as it manifests as a constant yearning and need for a connection to the divine. And you reach outside yourself to drugs and alcohol and gambling and sex and food and spending sprees. You reach outside yourself to try to fill this spiritual void. filling this spiritual void with God is the ultimate treatment for alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an unorthodox treatment for an illness, and it's misunderstood by so many people. It's maligned. People think that the people who practice these things are part of a cult, or they're religious crackpots. It's accessing a spiritual power that exists,
mm-hmm.
and
mm-hmm.
you can call it whatever you want. What I call it is I call it the miraculous healing power of God that I can participate in by trying to align my will with what He would have me do and be, and following some of these simple spiritual exercises places me in proximity to this power, and it's able to manifest through me. I'll never take credit for this power. I'll never say, I've got the power now. I think the power moves through me, and it is a direct manifestation of God. And it's not a given. In other words, if I drop the spiritual ball, if I stop participating in the maintenance of my spiritual condition, this power can kind of dissipate and not be not be there at a level that is going to be able to keep me sober. But if I do continue to participate in the spiritual process, that power is there and has been for very close to 20 years now.
I believe very strongly in what you're saying because, I believe that God is there. He is willing. He wants to bless me. He wants to give me His power, and it's always His. It's never mine. But whether I do the certain things that I need to do, these simple rules and so forth, I'm going to shut myself off. I mean, some people say, well, then God just stops blessing you. No, I think what I do anyway, is I shut myself off from the sunlight of the Spirit, meaning His Spirit, and it's like a wall, and His blessings just can't get through it because I'm rejecting them by not doing the things that brings those blessings into my life.
I agree. I agree. There's the great line in the step book that says, "God will not render us white as snow without our cooperation."
Yeah.
And that sentence haunts me because it leads me to, how then shall I cooperate? I need to be about the business of cooperating, don't I, Monty?
Yes, you do, and I do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. See that God could and would if He were sought. There's so many statements in the book. I think they really understood that the alcoholic is going to really have some doubts about if he seeks God, will he find Him. There's a great line in the 12 and 12 again that says the hoop that you're going to jump through is larger than you think it is. God will not make too hard terms for those who seek Him. That God could and would if He were sought. We need to be about the business of seeking God. And I think it's through seeking God and continuing to seek God through a lot of these processes, through a lot of these exercises, through meditation and prayer. I think in our continuing goal to seek God and to know more about what God's will is for us, I think that is the best possible atmosphere to be for long-term recovery.
Yeah, amen to that.
Being convinced, we were at step 3. So that would lead me to believe that everything up to halfway through page 60 was steps 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? I'm going to tell a story, and then we can finish up,
okay.
And we'll pick it up at the first requirement next week, Monty. But I'm going to tell a story. Okay, we're gonna decide to turn our will and our life over to God as we understand Him. We're going to decide. Step 3 is basically just a decision. But what a lot of people don't understand is they'll do the third step prayer and think that they've turned their will and their life over to God. The decision needs to be followed by commitment and by action. Now, what I mean by that is I'm gonna tell a story that kind of I like to use when I'm explaining this to someone. A chicken and a pig are walking down the road one day, and they see a sign that says "Help feed the poor." And the chicken looks over at the pig and says, "Hey, pig, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? Why don't we help feed the poor?" And the pig looks over at the chicken and says, "Well, how are we going to do that?" And the chicken says to the pig, "We'll feed them ham and eggs." Now, the pig looks down at the chicken and says, "Hey, that's easy for you to say. All you need to do is make a simple decision to lay a few eggs. I have to give my life up to feed them ham." Now, that's the difference, I think, between a decision and the commitment to turn one's will and life over to the care of God. Yes, we need to make the decision, but if it's not followed up by the commitment to actually do the work to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, you ain't going nowhere.
Then it really wasn't a decision at all, was it?
The decision is to live life along spiritual lines or die in alcoholic death. So that's what
yeah, there you go.
There is no door number C.
Very good. Very, very good. I love that story. And how true it is. And a lot I hear folks, and I'm not just talking about in Alcoholics Anonymous, but just in life in general, lots of people make decisions or are willing, and they kind of talk about it like that is the crust of it. That's all, and it's kind of an excuse to not go any further.
Well, I say the third step prayer every morning. Well, that's great. The issue though is the third step prayer is basically an affirmation. And what an affirmation is you've already made the decision and you're affirming it with a prayer. But if you say the prayer and don't move forward with inventory and amends and prayer meditation, you haven't made you haven't made a firm decision. It's not being followed up by commitment and action.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually so true. Well, what a great study, as always, moving into how it works, and perhaps for the first time in many people's lives that are listening, we've gotten up to how it works. Some people, they started how it works. That's all they know is how it works, and the 12 traditions and the preamble. And we certainly have cracked open a huge container of just what I would consider really the filet mignon of what recovery is all about in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous by going through this entire book page by page, line by line. I think that is really the key to any understanding of any piece of literature or textbook, is to read it all, every single word. And I
so agree, Monty.
Yeah.
I so agree. I don't really agree with in support groups having the shades up on the wall with the steps on them, because that leads a lot of people to believe that they can work the steps off the wall. And if you work the steps off the wall, you're going to have an off the wall program.
Yeah. That is very, very true. Now, see, every time I look at those steps on the wall in my home group, I'm going to be thinking about that. Take them suckers down. Well, Chris, man, thank you so much. And of course, thank you for the this week's suggested book, The Road to Fellowship, the role of the Emmanuel Movement and the Jacoby Club in the development of Alcoholics Anonymous. Folks, you can get that book. Just click on the link here at the webpage. If you're listening on a portable device or somebody's giving you a CD, simply go to take12radio.com and click on Sunday's show, Walking Through the Big Book with Chris Schroeder. Chris, thanks, my friend.
You are welcome, Monty.
It has been a good time, all of you scallywags out there. So join us next time as together we walk through the big book. Bye-bye now.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.